Good morning. Who doesn't love a good story? So often, my youngest daughter and I find ourselves curled up on the couch together. When we were up in the north, we always had blankets over us. Here, it's a little bit lighter, but we're watching Hallmark movies. I'm a fan of rom-com and the Hallmark. And here's how it goes when we're watching them. I'm sitting there going, this is so predictable. Oh my goodness, that's corny. As we share a box of tissues together and cry our way through the whole movie. And when it's done, we're like, do we have time for another one? Or three? I just love them. Well, the book of Ruth is the best type of story ever. It contains tragedy, death, loyalty, friendship, love, romance, suspense, humor, reversal of fortune. It's written in perfect symmetry from front to back. And of 85 verses in this book, 55 of them are dialogue spoken in Hebrew poetry. And so that leads me to believe, I speculate, that this was actually a court drama that was put on for King David to honor the people in his heritage. I had mentioned that one time previously, and a person came up to me after and took issue because they were like, are you saying it's a play? Like Hamlet? Like Macbeth? And I was like, okay, I'm not sure the question here. Does this person not know what a play is? And then I was like, well, yes, Hamlet and Macbeth are indeed plays. They're not inspired like the book of Ruth or like scripture. But so to clarify, I believe these are real people who existed. They're in the heritage of King David. They lived real lives, and the historical things that we're told about in the Bible really happened. But what we get here is a summary testimony of that life. And it's so neat and clean. Again, written in perfect symmetry, the lines spoken in poetry. And it's a summary, so it's not messy like our real lives get lived and long, and it shortens things up because it tells us the things we need to know that were true about true people to make a point about God and to teach us about life. And so this play was being performed to celebrate all of these kind of things. So, when you read the book of Ruth, grab some popcorn, sit back, relax, and enjoy the show. So it is set, the book of Ruth, in the days of the judges. It was a time in Israel's history that was unstable. There was no central authority figure. Israel wasn't a nation yet. They were still separate tribes. And so it was characterized by everyone was doing what was right in his own eyes. And so they would have these cycles that the nation would go through where they'd do their own thing, resulted in chaos, as we see up here. And chaos were the kind of things: child slaughter, poverty, storms, death. Think bad things: abuse, drought, barrenness, pestilence, disease, selfishness, lawlessness, anxiety, sickness, violence, idolatry, death. All the bad stuff would happen. Then the people would say, oh, wait, maybe we should follow God. And they'd cry out to God for help. He'd bring a judge who would tell them to all smarten up and start following God's ways. They would. He would defeat their enemies who were attacking them, settle out the wars, and then things would go well for them for a while. That judge would die, and then they'd start the cycle all over again. And so this is the period of the judges again. Think unstable, think a period of chaos that was going on. My husband, Andrew, has done his doctoral work, and his main piece that he was working on is he was talking about chaos battles in the Old Testament. And when he would share this, just short years ago, when he would talk about it, he would introduce and talk about chaos in the Bible, people in the audience would like laugh. He'd say chaos, and they'd be like, oh, and they'd talk about the sitcom from the 1960s, Get Smart, and they'd be, oh, get smart, like chaos, control, right? Because that was the only reference point they had. And he would have to bridge them to, well, in the ancient world, and this was what their world was like, and try to like make it make more sense, because we were living in more prosperity. Things were more stable. Unfortunately, just a couple of years later, how many of you have heard the word chaos said this week, today, besides me saying it, right? How many of you have used it yourself to describe the current state of things in our world? It's all the time. And just knowing his studies in that, this wasn't a thing shortly ago. And so unfortunately, this is what we have. Our world today, it isn't just an ancient thing. We have the kind of things going on in our world. Up on the slide, there's some statistics. This comes from a book by Simon Sinek, Start With Why. These are 2014. He was talking about how many people were in these various jobs in the United States. 77,000 clinical psychologists, 192,000 clinical social workers, 105,000 mental health counselors, 50,000 family therapists, 17,000 nurse psychotherapists, 30,000 life coaches. He says, the more we try to do as we see fit, do what's right in our own eyes, make ourselves happy, the less happy we seem to be. And this is from 2014. He's like, these keep increasing, the number of people who need to do these roles, and the more we're going to them, and yet we don't seem to be solving our problems. If we look at Psalm 16:4, it sums it up like this: the sorrows of those who've bartered for another God will be multiplied. And so this is the stage set for the book of Ruth, the time of the judges. It was a chaotic time, and we can relate with that now. We're living in chaotic days ourselves. So back to the play. It talks about a famine in Judah that drove Elimelech, Naomi, and their two sons, Mahlon and Chilion, from Bethlehem to Moab so that they could go get food. As you do read through the book of Ruth, watch the food is driving all of the activity. And so here, the lack of food sends them to Moab. While they're in Moab, Elimelech dies. Mahlon and Chilion marry two Moabite women. Mahlon marries Ruth, Chilion marries Orpah. And then both sons die. All of this within a period of 10 years. Again, very quickly said by a narrator in the play, but the backstory here makes it personal for Naomi. So the general chaos that's going on in the nation of Israel during the period of the judges that's negatively impacting them individually, socially, politically, in all of those ways, it now becomes personal for her. She's living a level of chaos herself with the kind of loss that she's had. She's lost of her loved ones. Anyone watching a play back then, they would relate, right? Anyone who's human can relate with loss. We've all experienced loss, lost loved ones, lost friends, loss of security, lost stability. And I can relate with where Naomi was. So when Andrew and I first got married, we settled in his hometown, and we started going to his home church where he grew up. It was his world. I had shared my testimony earlier where both of us had grown up in the church. That was our world. It was everything we had. As we arrived back at his hometown to attend his church, they actually got connected with a group called the Shepherding Movement. And if you look in church history books, it's a dark time in the church. And the theory was that they were going to disciple people. What a wonderful, godly, biblical thing, right? And so they were going to have disciples and be shepherds and raise people up. The reality was a bunch of power-hungry people started abusing people in the name of shepherding, in the name of discipling, and they left in their wake a lot of devastated Christians. I think you guys read that Tale of Three Kings, and some of those books that he wrote were sometimes speaking to the devastation that occurred in this thing. As it happened, one of the leaders in the church where he grew up decided to run a smear campaign against us and has for decades called every church we ever went to and gave them a preview before we got there. And we were basically the world we had known, the church we had gone to, our whole, everything we had. We were on the outside looking in. We lost our church family. We lost our Christian family. We lost any kind of support. It was painful. It was lonely. And it was disconcerting because where you had anchored yourself and where we had our reality, it was pulled out from under us. And it's like, what do we do? Where do we go? What happens to us now? And it was a real sense of loss. And like we don't get all the details in Ruth, we don't have time to dig into all the details that were around it, but just to say, early in our life, we were first married, I found myself at a sense of loss and just wondering, what do I do? Where do I go? What does this mean for my faith? My faith is to keep following this. What do you do? How does all of this play in? So back to the play, Naomi hears that Yahweh, and I will mention Yahweh different times. We're in the Old Testament and we're talking about the nation of Israel and how they reference God. So if that's not something you've heard before, it's the name, the covenant name that the nation of Israel would call God. And so if you think of it, it means to them the God who is and the God who causes to be. So when they use that name, it's like if we would reference and use the title creator. Again, the God of the Bible that we believe creates. And so if you hear me say Yahweh, that's it. It's talking about the God who is, the God who creates to be, the only one like that. And so she hears that he has provided food back into the nation of Judah again. So she decides it's time to go back home, back to Bethlehem. She starts out on the journey with her two daughters-in-law, but she turns around to them and tells them don't come with me. I'm going back. Don't go. And what she tells them is, I can't provide, it's in verse 11, I can't provide you with, she says rest. Some translations call it security and all of that. She's like, I can't give that to you. I can't give you husbands. I'm too old. And so she tells them to turn around and go back. And in her sense of loss, in her sense of brokenness, she is now caught up with, I just need to go home. And she's not necessarily seeing everything she needs to do. So I look at this. She tells them three things. She tells them, I'm too old to have any more sons for you. And then she's like, even if I could have sons, even if I got married tonight, I were to conceive and then have them, are you going to wait for them to grow up and then marry them? And she's just going on. And then she's like, God's hand has turned against me. Don't come with me. If his hand has turned against me, what do I have to offer you? And I call it, have you ever played that game, Two Truths and a Lie, where you try to get to know people and you try to understand what things they said about themselves were true and what ones were not? So I see it, she's playing Two Truths and a Lie. She probably is too old to have kids. If she did have one, they probably wouldn't wait around to marry him. But then she turns around and says, God's hand has turned against me. And it's like, oh no, that's the false one there. That's the one that's not the case. And so Ruth and Orpah cry. They say they're not going to go. Finally, Orpah does go back. She heads back home. And the thing about it, it says in the text, she goes back to her mother and to her gods. And Naomi says it. Yeah, she went back to her mother, she went to her gods. And so one thing that's happening in her sense of loss is that she's thinking what she needs to offer these ladies are sons. But what she doesn't realize is that even broken and destitute, her knowledge of the God who is and the God who causes to be is what she needs to give them. And that's enough. And so she's thinking, I have nothing for myself, and I have nothing for anybody else. And so don't even come with me. And it's a world of different, it's what they have. Now, Ruth refuses to leave, though. She clings to her, and she swears loyalty. She tells her that where she goes, where Naomi goes, she'll go. Where Naomi's people are, they're going to be her people. She says where Naomi dies, she's going to die, and she's going to make Naomi's God her God. And she gives evidence that he already is her God in the statement, because she says, may the Lord basically kill me if I don't show loyalty to you. And if you're reading in the text, if you see Lord, you may already know this. You see Lord in all capitals, it's a great big L, and then it's slightly smaller, O-R-D in all caps. Whenever they say that, that's the use of the word Yahweh. And so this is Naomi in this speech telling her, I'm making a covenant with God that I'm not leaving you. And so Naomi stops. She's like, okay, I'm not going to fight with that. You've just made a vow to God, and you're going to come with me. It shows that Ruth has converted from her paganism and has already come to know this God, the God who created the world, and she realizes there's nothing like it. I'm not going back. I'm not going back to Moab with the paganism. And so what we have up here on the slide is to show the contrast between the different worldviews. So the worldview that Naomi has, that Ruth has bought into, is that there's one God. He's the creator, and he's the only one like him. He's all-powerful, all-knowing. He's ever-present, and he has purpose. And when we wake up to him and wake up to a knowledge that there's this creator in the world, by giving our lives to him, that's where we find our purpose. And then he gives direction and hope. And there's no other one. There's basically two worldviews. It's this one, or it's the do what's right in your own eyes in the pagan world. And so what Orpah goes back to is there's many gods. In Moab at the time, the chief god was Chemosh, and he required child sacrifice. Some things never change, right? We're talking about the bridge between the old and the new, when modern day progressivism looks a whole lot like 5,000-year-old paganism. We have, their gods are created in their stories. Chemosh, there's a story about how he himself was created. And they're limited. They're limited sometimes by their strengths, even in their own stories, and they're limited by their weaknesses. They're gods that their worshipers manipulate. They don't follow and give adherence necessarily to that. They're afraid of these gods, and they do things to try to make things turn out better for themselves by manipulating these gods. The pagan gods give no purpose in life, no direction, and no hope. And so it's not just, you worship Yahweh, I worship Chemosh, hey, let's agree to disagree. It's not. One of them's true and gives the meaning to all of life because he's the creator of the world, and the other one is false. So even though she's destitute and bereft, she has something to offer. And just in my life, I talked about some of that sense of loss. When we were first married, we had gone to Bible college together, and we had some different friends, and we would go around and we would do street witnessing on the weekends. We would go into Providence, Rhode Island, and share our faith. And when some of the stuff happened that, again, we were outside of the church world, we were outside, all of this happened, we stopped doing it. Some of it was we started having kids and we're busy too. But some of it was when we would go on the streets and share our faith with people and witness to them, I found I shared my faith other times too. Because it's almost like you got a habit. You were used to sharing and you did some and then you did more of it. And we stopped doing that. And some of it too, I would think, oh, if I go share my faith with someone, how about this? I was worried they might get saved. And I'm like, if they get saved, where am I going to tell them to go to church? Because I'm on the outs. And one, I'm like, I'm not going to send them over to the shepherding movement, right? It's like, that wouldn't be good. And then, oh, but then if they find out that I'm on the outs with the church, do they even want to talk to me? And then, wow, I'm at such a loss and I feel so low. Am I anyone? Does anyone want anything I even have? Like, why? Like, should I even go talk to them? And so Naomi is thinking she needs to get them sons. I'm overthinking it. I don't know if it's a lady thing, right? Like, because see how she's trying to solve all these problems. What if I got married tonight and you can't do it and they're too old? And that's what I'm doing. And what if they need to go to church? And what if they're doing that? Instead of thinking, oh my goodness, if the God of all creation saves someone's soul, why don't I leave it up to him, right? How they might get discipled or something like that. But just talking about, sometimes we get into a sense of loss. We lose our direction and don't know. We lose priority and we lose a sense of where things are. So what's up on the screen now is during difficult times, I was like, I need to understand why I believe what I believe. So I started even examining things and going, even in prayer one time, I was praying and I was like, well, I'm not going to leave you, God, because you're right and you have it all. How magnanimous of me, right? Hey, you who created all this and me and everything else, you're okay. Luckily, I didn't live in the lightning strike capital of the world then. But I have a real issue with some of your people. And I'm not real thrilled with your organization, actually. We need to work this out. But at that time, I was like, I need to come up with something I can anchor myself to, something that can feeling proof my faith. Because when I'm at a sense of loss, and when I don't know where things are, I need to have something I can get my back against and something, because what are the alternatives? And that's when, if you're at a loss and you're discouraged and whatever, the one thing you always want to keep there is if you're looking for alternatives, make sure you do it and you assess it on the same terms of what you're walking away from. So you might have people who are like, oh, our Bibles didn't fall out of the sky like magic and like leather bound, gilded edge, maps at the back and something in the front translated into English. And when they start seeing the human element of what brought about their scriptures, they want to walk away. But it's like, well, what are you going to go to? The Mormon scriptures? They don't stand up. They don't stand the test of this. So whatever terms you go on, or you want to become Islam, or like, what are you going to walk away from? Make sure that you're examining it and keeping it in the same terms as what you are, and you'll find yourself, you really do need to stay with the God of all creation, because that's the one that's going to measure up, and that's the one that's going to hold you through. And so again, back to my worldview, I came up with 5 elements. Now I would probably tack one on the front, because there's such a slip in our society. I would probably even put on the front of it, there is truth, because sometimes the conversations have backed up where people don't even orient themselves and don't even know that there's truth in this world. And so I'd probably say there is truth. And then with that, one of the truths is there is a God. And his very existence obligates all of humankind. It's not just a nice little thought that there's a God. That he is there and that he created this world automatically obligates me to say, what do I need to do in service of you? Because I owe you everything. He's defined in the Bible. I don't have to make up what he's like. In its pages, we can learn about him, and we can also learn to know him in relationship and reality. He has a plan, and it's defined in his eternal wisdom. And so we don't have to think he's out of control, even like Naomi, where she's standing there and she thinks he's not there. He's not around. I'm empty. We know he has a plan, his unfolding eternal salvation plan that we can be a part of. He's in control of that plan. There's not a fight. There's not a battle. It's not like, oh, I hope Satan doesn't beat him out. Oh, my I hope something like this turns out. It's like he's in perfect control. It's we who get out of control, and it's we who lose our perspective of it. And it's when we plug into him that we understand that this is the way things are. This is the way things need to be. And then at the bottom of it, even when we're low, we know we can anchor in. All of those other things are true, but he loves us. So whatever we're going through, he loves us beyond our wildest imaginings. So if this was hard, if I'm going through a time of loss, and and how do I make this happen? To say, he loves me. So how do I make sense of this in light of his love? When the comparison between paganism and the divine order, when we plug into him, these are the kind of things. Before we saw the chaos slide, everything was going wild. And then here we see it, the kind of things we get in a world where we're honoring the Lord and doing his things right and not just doing what's right in our own eyes. We see order, joy, kindness, love, patience. We see things like the fruit of the Spirit coming about and being in play. So back to the play. Naomi and Ruth get back to Bethlehem, where the women of the town come and they embrace Naomi. They're happy she's back. And Naomi tells them, don't call me Naomi. Her name means pleasant. It's the word naim, pleasant in Hebrew. She says, call me bitter, because the Almighty has gone out against me. In the next slide, when she goes back to the town, she's moved on. Naomi has gone deeper into her sense of loss and her perspective on it. She went from 2 truths and a lie to, when she gets back to the town, she tells 3 lies and a truth to the lady. She is saying, the Almighty has dealt bitterly with me. Not true. She says, I went away full. That is true. She did go away full. The Lord has brought me back empty. False. She has someone standing beside her who's just sworn undying loyalty to her. And then the Lord has testified against me. The Almighty has brought calamity upon me. False again. And so we see her perspective of what has happened is now really not aligned with reality. And then just in case in watching the play, you missed it, the narrator comes in and says, yeah, Naomi arrived back in the town with Ruth. Because in case you believed the empty thing, she's not. She's back there with Ruth. And in time with the barley harvest. So again, there's that food imagery again, talking about her arriving back then. Moving on to Acts 2 and 3, we have in here 5 parallel steps that show the same things happen in both chapters. So remember the talk about this is written in perfect symmetry, but there's also a progression and growth for Naomi. And so in Act 2, it starts, and also watch, we talk about happenstance. As it's happening and you're reading it, just watch how many times it's like, and it happened that, and the chance was, and it just so came about. It's all like they're living their life, and they're not necessarily intending some of this stuff, but showing God's hand, guiding them just by chance as they're living their life. So Act 2 starts out, Ruth concocts a plan. She's like, I need to go get food. And so they need to eat, they need to live. And she says, we've got the barley harvest that's going on, and she's going to go pick up barley for them to come and eat. And there was a law in Israel that would protect the poor, that when people owned a field, they couldn't harvest everything. They had to leave the corners open for poor people to go with their own hard work, go help themselves and get some of that so that they would have a means to eat and not starve. And so Ruth is going to go there and she's going to get this food, and the part Naomi plays in it is she's like, yeah, go ahead. I bless you. Go ahead and do it. So by chance, Ruth happens to go to the field of Naomi's closest relative, Boaz. He owns the field. And so at Boaz's place in Act 2, it's his field. And she goes and she's starting to gather some food for her and Naomi. And then she gets tired. She needs to get a water break. She goes and takes water. And it just so happens, as she's taking her water break, Boaz shows up at his field and sees her. And he's intrigued. And he says, who's this? So he asks about her. Who's that lady over there taking the water break? And everyone tells, oh yeah, she's Naomi's daughter-in-law. She's a hard worker. She's working hard. They say good things about her. And we also see Boaz is presented as a good guy. So again, Day of the Judges, people are doing what's right in their own eyes, but he's following God's law. He's allowing people to glean. He's not just like taking all his corners. I even say he doesn't cut corners with his faith, and he literally doesn't in his field, and he doesn't in how he's honoring things. And you see how he's treating his people. He's treating his workers well. He's being kind. And so when he realizes Ruth is there and that she's doing a good job toward Naomi. He's like, don't go to any other fields. Keep coming back to mine because she's safe. She might not be safe in some of the other ones in the days of the judges. Like some of them might harm the women who would go there. He gives her water and then he even gives her a meal, not just the stuff she's gathering around. He gives her a really good meal and then he gives her a whole bunch of other food. So again, remember the food. The food keeps coming up in this story. He blesses her with a whole bunch of food and she doesn't necessarily get it all what's happening because she doesn't have a context. So she brings all this food home to Naomi and Naomi's like, where'd you go today? Because like you've got a lot there. And so Ruth tells her and she says, well, where I went today, it's Boaz. And Naomi can't even believe it. She's like, oh my goodness, I'm related to him. And this is where she starts coming to life and seeing God's hand, that it's been there. He's there. And she says, he's my relative. And God blessed you that you showed up in his field and that he gave you all that food and everything. And so we see her again coming alive. She rejoices. And then she tells Ruth, yeah, go back to Boaz's field. Don't go anywhere else because this is working really well for us. We then move in to Act 3. So again, turning point is at the end of 2, where Naomi's like, hold on, this is working out. At the beginning of 3, Naomi's the one concocting the plan this time. It's not Ruth. The other one, Ruth, is like, hey, let me go get food. This time, it's Naomi. And she says, you know what? I should seek rest for you, Ruth. And remember back in chapter 1, what she said she couldn't do for them? She gave a prayer. She's like, I hope God gives you guys rest in the home of your husband. And here she's coming back into play. And she's going, wait, I'm the one who's supposed to give you rest in the home of your husband. I'm not just going to throw it over the fence to God. And she's starting to realize, oh, all that overthinking that she had done, where it was like, I'm too old to have sons. If I had a son, and then they need to grow up, and it's like, well, wait a minute. God had a plan here all along, and you were doing all this nonsense of like, you needed to get married now and have a kid and do all this. And so she starts to concoct the plan, and she realizes that there was a provision in their nation for widows and for people. So she's like, I have land, and if we give the land to Boaz, and then if you marry him, then he can raise up in Mahlon's name a son, and it's all coming together with her. And she's like, oh my goodness, the plan was there all along. And I was coming up with all this silliness that said it wouldn't work. And so in her plan, she tells Ruth to go to Boaz's place again. This time it's the threshing floor because it's the harvest going on. And so they're going to be threshing out the barley and getting it ready. And at that time, the workers are going to stay at the threshing floor because they're not going to leave it. They don't want someone coming and stealing the stuff or whatever. They're going to stay there. They're also probably working really long days. And so she's like, go to the threshing floor. It's going to be dark. Go there at night. Find Boaz and uncover his feet. And those watching the play, this would have been a euphemism. That it sounds like she's telling Ruth to do something lewd. And so again, in the play, they're, whoa, this is getting juicy in the play. And I'm like, not like my Hallmark movies that are like pretty clean. And so they're like, what's going on? What's Naomi suggesting? Like an illicit affair with Boaz? And so Ruth goes to the threshing floor in the dark, happens to find Boaz, doesn't like find some other guy by mistake. And then in the play, it tells us, and she really uncovered his feet, like his feet. It's like, you audience, she didn't do anything bad. It's like, what were you thinking? Oh my goodness. And so again, they're playing with you, a little bit of humor. So when Ruth ends up at Boaz's feet, and then he's like, oh, my feet are cold. There's no blanket on him anymore. And then there's someone there. And that's where he says, who is it? Who is that at my feet? And it's Ruth. He's asking, who's that person at the feet? And then she says the thing, lets him know, hey, I want to marry you. Will you take the land we have? Would you raise up a son for Mahlon? Could it work? And Boaz is like, yes, but there's one more person who's closer relative who has a right before me. And so again, in the play, we're already coming along. How my daughter always says it. She's like, we're shipping Boaz and Ruth. We want them to get together. And now it's like, oh my goodness, there's a little bit of suspense. There might be someone else coming in who's going to mess this picture up for them. He gives her food to go away with again, so that when she leaves the threshing floor, it's not going to look like she was there doing anything bad, but that she was there, got food, and is going home. When she brings the food home, she tells Naomi, Boaz has a plan. He may not be the one, but he's going to ask the next guy. If he's going to ask the next guy If he wants to marry Ruth, if he does, that's what'll happen. Otherwise, and he says he'll settle it quickly. And Naomi again ends up in this chapter rejoicing, being happy, and saying, things are going to work out. She's come alive. She's seeing that things are going to be good. And she goes, let's wait. Let's trust that things will work out as Boaz goes forward. And so again, you see that whole parallel in the two acts that happened. Everywhere she's showing up, she happens to get to the right thing. And that still happens today in our life. We don't always plan everything tip to tail, and it works out for us. And so I'm familiar with a woman who found herself looking for a church at a low point in her life. She just moved to a new home in a new area. It happened that on her first Sunday at the church, she heard the most amazing sermon, and it made her want to come back. It happened that the sermon was preached by an Old Testament scholar who happened to be preaching at that church for the first time in 6 years. 2 months into a new job, her job was eliminated and she needed to find other work. When she took her kids to youth group at the church, it happened that one of the youth pastors was a recruiter at the company she worked. And he interviewed her on the spot when she dropped her kids off to church. And it happened that she got hired for a new job at an industry-leading company despite the fact that she had no prior work experience and lacked formal education. And then it happened that 2 years into that job, she had a boss who took her under her wing and mentored her and taught her the business, taught her human resources, taught her project management, and the woman who all that happened to happens to be me. And 20 years in, I now have a career, and during that period of my life, seeing the Lord just bring things together for me woke me up. Like I said, where I had suffered the loss, I had anchored myself into, I need to understand why I believe what I believe and stick with it regardless. And then starting to see God's hand. Oh my goodness, he provided this for me. This shouldn't have even happened. I'm not even qualified to do this. And each next step, not even looking for, just God provided for. And so I just want to say, God acts in the happenstance of our lives. Show faith to him. Take the next step forward. Don't check out. Don't think you owe it to everybody. Understand that just showing people the God of creation is enough. That's enough for us. It's enough for him. So then we move into 4. So Boaz steps in. It's called the kinsman redeemer, and he's going to come in and rescue Ruth, marry her if he can. And so he says, I'm going to make sure things go right. And so he goes to the gate of the town, and he's looking for this closer relative just to make sure. Is he the one who needs to do it, or is it Boaz? And in the story, this is really funny. In the play, the guy Boaz talks to is translated Mr. So-and-so. And so everybody else has names in the play. This is Mr. So-and-so. Boaz says, hey, I've got some land. Do you want the land? And he's like, yeah, that sounds good. And he goes, okay. The land comes with this Moabite lady. You'll need to marry her, and your first child won't take your name. He'll be raised up in Mahlon's name to preserve that family name. And the guy's like, whoa. I wanted the land. I don't want that. And he says in it, I don't want to lose my inheritance. And part of his inheritance is the preservation of his name. And so he refuses because he doesn't want to lose the preservation of his name. And he goes down in infamy as Mr. So-and-so. And we know Elimelech, Mahlon, Kilian, and Boaz, right? So this is funny because the people in the play, they may even have known the guy's name and know that they're not going to preserve it in history for him. So they're getting a good chuckle about Mr. So-and-so. But we're happy because we really wanted Ruth to get together with Boaz, because Boaz is a really good guy. He's honoring God in a day when barely anybody else is, and he's recognized the worth of Ruth and all of her faithfulness to Naomi. So things in the story go full circle. Remember how it's written in perfect symmetry. So if we look at the top, it starts out in chaos in the days of the judges. Then we have death and sorrow with the tragedy that happens with Naomi's family. We have family loyalty, where this is where Ruth swears undying loyalty to Naomi. She's like, I choose you. I'm going with you. You're my family. I'm not going back to the pagan family in Moab. And then in the center, we have in the barley field, by chance, God is working in their life. In 3, in the threshing floor, God is acting by chance. And then we have family redemption, because as Boaz and Ruth get married, They conceive a child. His name is Obed. He's raised up in the name of Malin, but we all know Boaz too, don't we? He didn't lose his name. We know both of them are there. And so the family is redeemed. And we see Naomi at the end. If you go through, and when you're reading through Ruth, one good study is to look at the lines. Who has lines? What does Naomi say? So you see what she's saying in chapter 1. We see barely saying anything in 2. In 3, she's come to life and she's concocting this plan and it's going. In 4, she's speechless with joy. She's holding the baby and she's standing back and she's like, it was there all along. And I missed it because I thought I had to solve it. I thought I needed to give people something out of my loss and my hurt that I didn't have. And I didn't realize the thing I needed to give them is something that exists apart from me anyway. And so, in summary, the book of Ruth transitions chaos in the moment, time of the judges, personal chaos for Naomi, to triumph for the ages through the transformation of a destitute widow by having her faithful actions and those of her family met by the faithful God in the normal happenstance of everyday life. And so to me, one thing we want to talk about is, again, back to Naomi. She's an insignificant widow. Nobody's insignificant, but in the world play, right? And in the end, we get this lineage of David that comes out, and she's responsible for King David bringing about stability in Israel because she's his great-grandmother. And so Naomi's transformation resulted in the transformation of her family, which resulted in the transformation of a nation. And it goes further than the book of Ruth that we know, because David is in the lineage of Jesus, who is the one who transforms all of humankind. Recently, 2 weeks ago, we were driving through Connecticut, and we saw a storefront church, and it had the most amazing name. We loved it. It was called The Church. Don't you love it? Is that like, I was like, how simply profound. And it had its mission. Its mission, it said, the church, where the lost are found. Is that nice and simple? And know the very, very best part of it? That didn't end there. And it said, and where the found are filled. Because we're not done just when we're found, right? And just like Naomi, just like myself, we may be found, we may have our salvation, but we're not done, and there's more. And we can find ourselves coming up empty, and we can find ourselves lost, and we can find ourselves needing to get anchored and reconnected. And I just love that we can be filled. And even to talk about, it's our duty to be filled. Because I talked about when I was running on empty and lost, who missed out because I wasn't sharing my faith? Who missed out? We have Orpah going back to paganism. That might have been an eternal consequence for her. And to say, we have a duty to stay filled to ourselves, to other people, and we can be. And so if you feel lost, feel a sense of loss, you're relating with Naomi on some of those levels. Feeling maybe a little bit of a loss of direction, you don't have to. You're not alone. And even to ask the Lord to wake you up. Because when I was lost, it wasn't that he was gone and it's like, oh my goodness, thank the Lord he finally showed up and stopped abandoning me. And it's like, no, it's that my perspective, my eyes opened to see him. We can come for prayer, we can talk about it. And then the other side of it is to say, if you're not running on empty and you feel like you're doing well, can you be like Ruth, who comes alongside one of those empty people and shows loyalty and says, I'm going to stick it out with you, and I'm going to see you through this difficult point until you come back to life and can realize that life is worth living.
If you like what you're hearing today, please subscribe below, and don't forget to share it on as many platforms as you can, and tell your friends to watch. Thank you.